The first government strategy that I want to look at is related to benefits, and that's universal credit. The current Conservative government is very individualistic, and their approach to benefits, or the more correct term to use is social security, is that they want to get as many people as possible back into work as quickly as possible. So they see benefits as a kind of necessary evil. Well, we need to pay these things so you don't starve, but we want to get you off benefits, we want to get you into work, and we want a company to be paying you money rather than the government to be paying you money as quickly as possible. And their argument is that benefits promote this kind of dependency culture. We've talked about dependency culture before. It's this idea that people go, oh, well, I'd rather just not work and live on benefits and get paid for doing nothing than actually try and find a job. So the current UK government, the Conservative government, have said we need to totally reform benefits. We need to change it to make it so that living on benefits is more unpleasant, is not more pleasant than having a job. They believe in pushing people off benefits into jobs. So this is called welfare reform. The main element of welfare reform, the main kind of government strategy for reducing wealth inequalities and thinking about benefits, is what's called universal credit. Essentially, what the government has done is taken a whole number of benefits that used to exist and put them into one single payment. So this is called universal credit. And it replaces job seekers allowance, which was paid weekly to people who were out of work, employment and support allowance, which was paid to people on low incomes, child tax credit, which was paid to low income families depending on how many children they have, and housing benefit, and this was paid to low income people to cover the cost of their housing. So you can see there were lots of different costs that needed covering, there were lots of different ways that people needed support, and previously they were paid those things separately. So they would get one claim for a job seeker allowance, that would come in 1 week, the next week they might get their child tax credit, they might get their housing benefit another week, they would all come in separately. The UK government has said, let's make this more efficient, let's make this more effective by paying just one payment depending on people's circumstances. So now, instead of getting lots of different payments coming in, they have one payment coming in, and this can be increased if people's circumstances get worse, and it can be decreased if people's circumstances get better. And it's much easier to change if somebody's circumstances change. So for under the old system, let's say you didn't have a job and you were on job seekers allowance, if you then got a low paying job, your job seekers allowance would stop, but it might be that the pay from your new job isn't enough to cover all your expenses. And so you would need to get employment support allowance, but it might take a while for this to kick in. And so there might be a period where you weren't getting anything in between those two times. Well, now universal credit, they can just increase it a little bit or decrease it or leave it the same based on what your needs are. So this is the idea, is that there's a gap in payments. It's easier for people to keep an eye on. It's easier for the government to know exactly how much is going to whom. And it's a simpler system. That's the theory. Unfortunately, and it should save money. Unfortunately, a lot of collectivist critics of the UK government said that this system has a lot of flaws. And there has been an official inquiry launched into universal credit because there's been so many problems with it. The biggest problem is delays in payment. What's happened is that people will sign up for universal credit, but then they might not get paid for months later. It's at least 42 days. So that's over a month that you have to wait before you get any money whatsoever. So if you've just lost your job and you need to pay your rent the next week, you can't do that with universal credit because you've got to wait for 42 days. It's also causing problems for landlords who are sort of saying, well, I'm going to evict this person because they're not paying their rent. It also means that people can't necessarily get food. They're having to go to food banks. It's causing absolute chaos. It's also a problem because it is paid just once per month. Rather than paid throughout the month. So under the old system, it was much easier for people to budget because they could say, well, here's how much I need for the next 2 weeks, and then my employment support allowance will come in, and then that'll keep me going for another 2 weeks, and then my ESA will come in, and then that'll keep me going for a week, and then something else. So it was much easier to budget. They only had to budget for a week at a time. Now, because things are paid a larger amount once per month, that can be harder for people to manage, and it can be hard, and it makes it much more complicated and kind of needlessly. The Department for Work and Pensions has said that people get used to the system and it all works out in the end, and that you can claim money back that you should have had previously, but that doesn't help if you weren't able to eat that month because you didn't have enough money. Having twice the money the following month doesn't help. And there are so many administrative problems that many people have not received benefits for up to 2 months because of these problems. The Guardian has calculated that the universal credit system will leave 1.2 million working families worse off. During the coronavirus pandemic, universal credit has been increased by £20 a week, which is a huge increase. It's a big deal, and it makes a huge difference to people who are, barely getting by. But that is due to end pretty soon. And there's a real concern that the government will say, well, that was just a temporary increase and we're going to cut it and we're going to go back, even though there are still massive problems, we're going to go back to this old system of £20 less per week. And there are real fears that could plunge huge numbers of people into absolute poverty, lead to massive increases on runs on food banks, and simply lead to people dying.